In this lesson titled Moving and Selecting, we're in Workbook Tips and Tricks, and we're on the Worksheet tab, Move and Select. Many times in Excel, it's not only important to know how to move around efficiently, how to skip to whole sections or move to the bottom or top of some contiguous data, but it's also important to know how to make those selections very easily as well. And we run across this problem all the time. Well, let me give you an example here. We're on column G, and if I wanted to say keep this value maybe in these top two values, but I want to delete everything else, if I scroll down here, we'll see that I have over 700 different rows of data. So if I wanted to keep this but delete everything else, I would click here and then I would start dragging down. But you can see I'd have to drag about 700 rows. Now you probably already know the shortcut Control Arrow for moving around efficiently in Excel. And let's just briefly go over that. You hold down your Control key and then you simply tap one of your arrow keys. So from this position right here, if I wanted to go all the way to the left, I would hold down Control, left arrow. It takes me to the very beginning, over here at the very beginning of row 4, so I'm in column A. Now I'm going to Control arrow to the right, and it takes me back to 3. It stops at 3 because that's where the data ends. Let's go up one with the up arrow. Now I'm going to do Control right arrow, and it stops here on J3 because that's where it hits some data. Now if I do it again, Control right arrow, it takes me all the way to the very end of Excel, XFD, which is about 16,000 columns. So I'm going to do Control arrow left, takes me here to J3 again and over. And so every time I hit those control arrows, I move until the data ends. So same thing for going to the bottom. Control down arrow, it takes me to 742. So very efficient way to move around. Control down arrow again, I go to the very bottom, which is just over 1,000,000 rows. Control arrow up to the bottom of my data, Control arrow up, over. So you get that. You're probably very familiar with that. Well, what's really useful in Excel is you can do those same moves, but you can do it while selecting your data. So this really comes in handy. So for instance, I want to delete everything down from the position I'm in right now, which is G4, and I want to delete everything, let's say, down there. Or maybe I wanted to reformat everything from that point down, so I needed to select it in order to format it. So I hold down my Control and do down arrow, but this time I'm going to add Shift. So it's Control Shift and then down arrow. So it takes me all the way to the bottom, but also selects that data. Now I could reformat it, delete it, anything I want. So I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard, and all of that is gone. So that does make a few problems when you have a large selection and now you need to move around, because several ways of moving around in Excel will also delete your selection so you don't have a selection anymore. Let me give you an example of that. So I make a selection over here. Let's say I pull this down here. I'm just dragging and I make this selection. And then I want to go back up to the top. So what if I did Control up arrow? Well, I just got rid of my selection. Let's do that selection again. I do a big selection here. And I want to see the top of my selection. Then I have to go all the way over here to my scroll bar with my mouse. I have to click on that and then I have to scroll up to get to the very top. So that's suboptimal, right? That's not the most efficient way to do it. Let's make a selection and show you how you can move around in that selection. So I'm going to use my arrow keys to make a selection now that we know how to do that. So I'm going to do Control Shift and do right arrow, and now that selected me all the way over to there. And now I'm going to do Control Shift down, and that took me all the way to the bottom, 742. Now with this selection, what I do is I do Control period. So I hold down the Control, and every time I hit period, it takes me to a different corner. This is F4, this is F742, and this is A742 over in the bottom left. I do control period, I'm to the top left, and then I'm to the top right. So you can see how it's moving around every time I hit control period. So that's very useful for moving around inside of a selection. So if you combine those, control arrow to move around, control shift arrow to make selection as you move around. And then if you use control period to move around in your selection, you can move around very quickly, very efficiently.